Hello, everyone. Dr. Michelini here today to talk to you about artificial intelligence and your voice. So let's dive in. When I talk about AI or artificial intelligence, what are we talking about exactly? Because things have changed a lot in the last year and a half here. Well, historically, artificial intelligence has meant things like chatbots that you might interact with on a website where something pops up that says, "How can I help you?" Grammarly, if you've ever used a grammar correction like Grammarly to correct your paper before you turn it in, or suggest a different ending, like an ing ending for a word, that's an artificial intelligence. If you've ever interacted with Siri on your phone or Alexa in your home to ask them a question, that's artificial intelligence. But over the last year and a half, artificial intelligence has changed quite a bit. Okay. There's this new type of artificial intelligence called generative AI. Generative AI encompasses both text and images. So it means an artificial intelligence that is producing text or images of a new combination that it hasn't seen before necessarily, but that's based on things that it's been fed. Okay. Specifically, what we're going to jump into in this presentation are large language models. And this is generative AI that only produces text, okay? So I'm not talking about like Midjourney or DALL-E, those produce images. I'm talking about a large language models like ChatGPT, Google Bard, and Claude. And there's others that are developing as well, okay? Now, these large language models can do certain things pretty well. The number one thing that they do is recognize, summarize, translate, predict, and generate content using very large data sets. So in essence, how they work is they were fed a whole bunch of information from the internet, and all they do is regurgitate it, okay? Now, this has problems with it as well, because the way that they work is that they are literally grouping words together. So if you've ever type something on your phone and it goes to like autocomplete or suggest something for you, or you're writing an email and it says like the next word is in gray, like, do you want to use this word? That's an autocomplete. A large language model works the same way. It's hard to tell that because it is so sophisticated, but basically from all the information it was fed, it's just kind of grouping words together that it knows go together. Like, I've seen these words together a lot. Let me just like put the next one that's the most common here. Okay. So it's very good at doing this. It doesn't necessarily make it the most accurate though, as you can imagine, right? So it's just grouping like things together. It creates very plausible sentences that don't always make sense, but sometimes do make sense, right? So it's very good at copying existing text. So everything that it's been fed is what it can regurgitate. It cannot come up with an original idea or an original thought because it's literally just copying things based on what it was fed. It can summarize stuff really well. It can create APA citations and other citations as well, sometimes with errors, but I'm sure it's getting better. And it can cull info from the web. So depending on the LLM, it sometimes has access to the internet live, and sometimes it does not, like ChatGPT does not. It's only updated to a certain amount, certain date, and then that's it. But others are more interactive with the current web, and you might be able to find something out more real time, okay? But as you can imagine, this does have limitations. So LLMs are not always as magical as they first appear. For one, they can never create an original thought. So everything that they spit out is based on something that already exists. Somebody else already thought about it. Somebody else already wrote about it. Okay. So this can be problematic because it can't really distinguish fact from fiction. So you imagine if you're fed large swaths of the internet, there are parts of the internet that are not entirely based in fact. I hope that's not a surprise to all of us, right? But it happens. So it doesn't know that what it's producing is a lie sometimes. And recent studies, as of January 2024, which is when I'm filming this, show that approximately 30% of the content produced by ChatGPT, Google Bard, etc., is false. So about a third of what it spits out is not reliable information. And part of this is based on the way it works, right? It's spitting out what it's fed, but it's also just like grouping words together that it's seen together. So I don't know, right? It doesn't know. It's not thinking about it. It also cannot credibly tell you where it's got its information from. So if you ask it for sources, sometimes it will give you sources. But again, sometimes the sources are made up because it's just like coupling words together. Like it's like, yeah, this sounds like a plausible book, but the book has never been written or doesn't exist. Or this sounds like the name of an article that would be written on this topic, and it spits it out. And sometimes that article exists, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes the authors are wrong. Occasionally it is correct, but it can't actually reliably tell you where it got its info. The information's kind of all jumbled in a sense from what it's been fed, okay? So you can't trust that it can tell you where it got that information. So you can't really check, like if something's fact or fiction, you can't check using that large language model. You can go out and check on your own, but not in that same interaction with the LLM that you're utilizing. It cannot solve moral problems. So it's actually really bad. Artificial intelligence as a whole is bad at solving moral problems because they require nuance, okay? So this is one of the reasons why self-driving cars have taken so long to develop, because if you're a human driving a car and you are in a predicament where you're either going to hit the vehicle next to you or you're going to hit a pedestrian crossing the street, you're going to do everything possible not to hit both of these items, right? The person and the vehicle. You might hit the vehicle over a person. You know, you're trying very, very quickly to make the best moral decision possible, right? Artificial intelligence, if it's driving the car, it does a quick assessment of the situation. So if the vehicle next to you has a child in it and the person crossing the street is older, let's say they're, you know, in their 60s or 70s, they're not a child, it might hit the pedestrian over the car. So, and it's hard to like program it to do one or the over the other, right? Like, how do you want your self-driving car programmed? Nobody wants to answer that question, right? You want to just say like, do your best to avoid the whole scenario, which is what a human would do. So it's not very good at these kind of nuanced, like, what do you do scenarios. It also isn't good at contextualizing highly rhetorical situations. So let's say I'm at work and I need to send an email to someone who messed something up, but I also need to make sure I keep that relationship a positive one because we work together and I need to be careful here. I need stuff from them in the future. I need to have a good working relationship. So if I'm going to write an email to them to let them know that they messed something up, I'm going to be really careful how I write that email to make sure that this relationship remains an open working relationship. That's a highly rhetorical situation. In other words, it requires a lot of nuance on my part and a lot of thought. And humans are really good at this. Like you have these situations all the time with your family, your friends, your coworkers, other students where you're like, let me just like word this a certain way, right? So nobody's feelings get hurt, that kind of thing. And AI is not very good at that. Okay. It's going to give you either a blunt thing or it's not going to be rhetorically contextualized well, or it's going to sound weird. So that's a better thing for a human to do. The other thing it cannot do is replace your critical thinking skills. So again, it cannot think about what it's spitting out. Only you can assess and think about ideas and what you want to say about them, okay? It is just grouping words together, all right? So maybe that's good for like getting a base handle on something, but again, it's also 30% false on average, so be careful, okay? The other thing that it can't do is give you an unbiased opinion. So we know now that AI has an algorithmic bias towards white male native English speakers, okay? This is nobody's fault here. All that this means is that the content that it was fed was primarily written by that demographic group, okay? So it has their sort of perspective on things. Nothing wrong with that perspective either. The only problem is when it leaves out other perspectives, right? So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a certain perspective, but we want to be inclusive, right? So I'm just using myself as an example. I'm a woman, so I have a uniquely female perspective on certain issues. And I bring that to the table whenever I write about it or speak about it, right? I'm also a mom. So, you know, I might talk about something from the perspective as a mom. And that's unique to me, right? And unique to possibly other moms who can relate. And so you want to be careful whenever you use a large language model that you're not just including one narrow perspective, right? That you're also opening it up and that your voice in particular is being heard, okay? also, even if you are male, and you're a native English speaker and all that, you might not want this thing speaking for you, right? You have your own unique perspective and you have other identities that add to who you are, that should be heard, okay? So that is my encouragement to you, to make sure that your voice is heard. And that is really our focus in talking about some of this, okay? The last thing I want to mention here to be careful about is that false info produced by large language models. Those are called hallucinations. So if somebody says like a ChatGPT or Google Bard is hallucinating, that means it's coming up with false information. Again, it's not trying to lie to you. It's just coupling words together, right? So it's producing false information, and that's called a hallucination. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why your voice is still important. And I hope here that it's clear in light of some of the conversation we just had, or some of the things that you just heard me talk about, right? AI has this limited perspective. If you let it talk for you, if you let it produce writing for you, you're not really getting to develop your own voice. Your voice isn't being heard and isn't adding to our understanding as humans of everything, right? So I have a quote here from Doctors V and LaQuintano that they wrote about writing classes, particularly with AI. And they said, the goal of writing classes is to help you express ideas, engage with other ideas, think critically about texts, learn to read mindfully, and so on. Writing is a subtle and powerful skill, and it takes a long time to learn and do well. Taking shortcuts may help you in the long term, meaning using a large language model to write for you could help you in the long term or short term, excuse me, but it has repercussions in the long term for motivation, ability to communicate, connect with others, or work productively. So there is a price to pay for using a large language model, okay? So a lot of the writing we do in this class is not going to use large language models, but we may use them occasionally, okay? And you can look at our syllabus statement for clarity on that. And I will also tell you when it's appropriate or not appropriate to use a large language model, okay? But I don't want this thing sort of taking over your voice, okay? I have another quote here from Dr. Jan LeCun, and he's one of the most foremost experts on generative AI. And he says, people sometimes feel threatened by the fact that at some point in the future, AI systems will be smarter than us. There's no question this will happen. We have to get used to this idea. Machines will be smarter than us in all the domains where we are smart, and probably in other domains we can't even fathom. Now, do we feel threatened by this, or do we feel empowered by it? If those systems are under our control, then it's empowering. Okay, so I want you to think about this for a minute here, right? He's saying if we can control these generative AIs or future AIs, then we're good, right? But that's a pretty big if. So my advice to you, my caution to you is to be careful. Be very careful with any large language model that you use. Okay, for one, it's biased, it produces false information. But two, don't let it replace your own critical thinking. If this is the world we're going into with smarter and smarter artificial intelligence, and there's no doubt he's right about that, you want to make sure that you still have your own 2 feet in critical thinking skills, that you are able to decide how and when your voice is important, right? And you need to be heard, and you don't want to be just sort of silenced by a machine that is able to speak for you or write for you. So be careful, okay? I'm not saying that I'm anti-generative AI. I'm not. Again, we are going to use it in some contexts, but they're very specific ones. And more importantly, I want you to develop your voice because it needs to be heard. Your voice in writing, okay? So I have some questions here for you to consider. You don't have to answer these anywhere, but as we close out this video, think about, what does your voice in writing sound like? What perspectives do you uniquely bring to the table? And a lot of times this has to do with our identity, right? So my voice sounds a little bit like I'm from this area of the country, right? I was born and raised in New Jersey. I grew up there. My mom was from Philly, so she has a little bit of a Philly accent. So sometimes that comes out for me. My dad's from New Jersey, so occasionally a little New Jersey accent word will slip out. But I've lived all over the country, so that also sort of mellows any accent in my voice. But that comes out sometimes. My perspectives that I uniquely bring, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm someone who has been to grad school, right? So I know what that's like. I was a student for 11 years to get my degrees. So I bring these different perspectives. I'm a teacher. What perspectives do you uniquely bring to the table? Who are you? Why is it important that people hear you? Okay, because they should. Each one of your voices are so important and deserve to be heard. People should listen to your unique perspective based on your identities and the things that you have experienced in your life, okay? And then think also about, how does writing something out help you to think through it? Because writing is a form of critical thinking. We know this, it's been well documented with research. So you don't want to just give up that power to something else to spit something out for you, right? So be careful with that as well. So that's my message on generative AI. I hope it helps you in this unit as you think about your voice in writing and the critical importance of it at this moment in time. See you online.